So with a new edition of the game coming soon, 10th edition Warhammer 40k is going to bring some shake-ups, but given Games Workshop's current rules practices, is it going to come alongside a rather big cull of models, lots of units going away in rules terms and never coming back? Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's miniatures and rules support for them, and I thought I'd take a video that might be worth highlighting some of the models that are most at risk of losing rule support when 40k changes edition. There are actually potentially quite a lot of choices that might not get rule support when Games Workshop redoes the rules. So the reason that I think that this is at least a fair possibility is there's been a couple of trends going on throughout 9th edition, both no model no rules from Games Workshop, plus Games Workshop's rotating range policy, and both of those are probably going to come together when 10th edition comes out. For the most part in their 9th edition codexes, if they don't sell the actual miniature or even the specific war gear loadout for it, then a unit is very unlikely to get those past war gear loadouts, even if they've had them for a long time into 40k's history. Any models that they might have produced in the past for them might have gone obsolete, and some things might get Legends rules, such as the Chaos Lord with the jump pack, but a whole load of things don't. Around about mid-9th edition, Games Workshop also decided to go with a policy of a rotating model range, basically their solution to their vast back catalogue of Finecast and Metal models that are likely going to be some of their least profitable models in their entire range. Rather than just saying that they're removed and gone for good, they said that they're going to pull the molds temporarily, and then when certain codexes and armies get some releases, they'll come back in waves of made-to-order pre-order things. Say for example what they did with the removed Imperial Guard Commissars fairly recently. Their eventual goal is likely to purge any Finecast resin relics from their range entirely. I suspect they want to replace literally everything with plastic kits, and then just keep these range-rotated models as individual print runs, which are quite efficient for them, as people are likely to order a bunch. That policy has resulted in a whole load of factions basically having holes in them, things that appear in their codexes but aren't actually sold directly by Games Workshop, aside in these very limited print runs which are quite sporadic. And it does affect quite a few armies. Almost every older established faction has taken some hits. Judging by the recent Chaos Space Marine and Imperial Guard Codex releases, it does indeed seem to be the policy that when a new codex comes out, things that don't have their models sold might not get rule support. Say for example Commissar Yarrick and the Jump Pack Chaos Lord both got range rotated, and then suddenly their datasheet mysteriously went missing from the updated version of their army book. The thing is with Warhammer 10th edition though, that the rumours have been for a long time that Games Workshop is going to do a full index reset of the game, basically rescind all current codexes, issue some simplified indexes with basic stats for the miniatures, and in terms of Games Workshop's no model no rules policy, that's going to be a fresh chance to look at every single faction, what they sell and what they don't, and whether or not they're going to continue to support it rules-wise. As a result, all the other miniatures that have currently been range rotated are probably looking at that date with some nervousness. At the moment it's seeming at least fairly likely that 10th edition's read-on rules could represent really quite a big cull of models that have had rule support for editions now. In general, with each one of these range-rotated miniatures, Games Workshop appears to have 3 different options, though it does appear that the most common one looks like if the model goes away, the rules will be gone in the updated book. There haven't been that many codexes since Games Workshop started doing the range rotation policy in earnest, but we did see a whole ton of miniatures and wargear options get the axe. Say for example the Chaos Lord with the jump pack, though they did give him a Legends rules datasheet, Commissar Yarrick of the Imperial Guard, perhaps the most famous casualty, Old Castellan Creed and Kell, though I guess the writing was on the wall for them given the events of the fall of Cadia, and other things for the Guard included Wordvane Psychers, veterans and special weapon squads, as they just had no specific kit, even if they basically still sell the models that you need to make them, and basically anything else that they didn't have wargear options for. Say for example vastly reduced wargear options for things like Chaos Lords, Chaos Terminators and Chosen, all of which had quite flexible datasheets before. There do appear to have been a few models that bucked the trend though. In Codex Chaos Space Marines, the Exalted Champion survived despite the model being range rotated. They actually brought him back for the made-to-order window around the Codex release, and it was similar for Huron Blackheart and Lucius the Eternal, I believe both of which were range rotated before Codex Chaos Marines came out as well. Finally, the other option is if the old model goes away but Games Workshop actually gets round to releasing a plastic kit. For Games Workshop, I guess one example would be the Commissar model. They removed the old Lord Commissar but gave a new generic sculpt that looks kind of similar. Realistically though, I think that's not likely to happen for very many units at the turn of 10th edition. Games Workshop's focus is mainly going to be on the big model wave release coming out alongside that, not on a whole bunch of disparate codexes and niche characters. I feel like the majority of the units that we're going to mention here are unlikely to receive a plastic kit at the start of 10th. I thought we'd just take a quick look at the various different options that have currently been range rotated, and I would currently deem these models and datasheets kind of at risk. I'm almost certainly going to be missing a few options for certain factions. Please let me know down in the comments if I miss anything major. First up, for the Space Marines, there's a bunch of generic HQ choices which are kind of under threat. The Chaos Space Marines had their Lord datasheets drastically reined in, and for the Space Marines I feel like it could be even worse. In terms of firstborn captains, Games Workshop removed a bunch en masse. There's now only the one with the power sword and plasma pistol. They got rid of the very flexible multi-part kit. I guess they still sell that jump pack kit, which might mean that the jump captain has the chance to survive. But honestly, I would be a little bit apprehensive of wargear loadouts and perhaps some of the other variant captains like the Terminator one or the Biker one. It is kind of similar for the Librarians, Chaplains, and Tech Marines as well. Games Workshop only sells one copy of each of those for the firstborn now. That would mean very likely set wargear like the Chaos Sorcerer had going forward. There's also no generic Terminator captain, and there's no option for a Tech Marine without a servo harness as well. At least I guess besides the Space Wolves Iron Priest, but that could be specific to them. There's similar options for a Blood Angel specific Terminator Librarian and a Death Watch Terminator captain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'd survive for all the other chapters. Like the Chaos Space Marines as well, I'd be a bit apprehensive for any unit that's got incredibly flexible wargear. Perhaps the one that springs to mind the most for the Space Marines might be the Vanguard Veterans. Their kit does admittedly have a fair amount of options on it, but it's not quite as universal as the selections that they can take right now. Given a rules update that may be similar to Chaos Terminators or Chosen, their wargear could get a lot more restrictive. Perhaps the real bulk of the models that could be lost though fall on named characters for other chapters. Games Workshop have been a bit hit and miss with the ones that they've kept in print and the ones that they've rotated. I don't know whether it's based on just which ones were selling better or something to do with molds or logistics or something, but quite a lot of named characters have stayed for some ranges and a fair few have just gone away. For the Blood Angels, the ones that are gone are Gabriel Seth with his enormous chainsword, Brother Corbulo, and Captain Tycho. I certainly expect that they'd be some of the less popular models in the Blood Angels HQ lineup. I think Gabriel Seth's a very cool character, but less people collect Flesh Terrors than full-blooded Blood Angels, I guess. For the Ultramarines, Cato Sicarius is gone, though I strongly suspect that he's going to get a Primaris model at some point in the future. We did see artwork of him depicted as a Primaris, and is somewhat active in recent 40k lore. Sergeant Kronos, the tank commander, though, might be going the same way as Knight Commander Pask of the Guard, and Sergeant Telion, the Ultramarine Scoutmaster, again he's a bit of a niche character. For the other Codex chapters, perhaps Darnath Lysander and Pedro Cantor are some of the more storied models that have been rotated. It would be very cool to see Primaris versions of those two. I guess they might be a little bit higher on the agenda than some of the others perhaps. And the generic Carnon bike for the White Scars has gone as well, and that kit going might potentially mean the end of the bike captain for Space Marines, as it would mean that they wouldn't have any kit at all. For the Space Wolves, things are mostly intact. I think it's just Lucas the Trickster who's missing, unless I'm missing anyone else. And for the Death Watch, Watch Captain Artemis has gone as well. Perhaps a slightly odd choice, that one, seeing as he was a fairly recent plastic kit. Again, Death Watch are kind of niche on their own though, and he's not even the most exciting captain for them. Overall, out of all these datasheets, if they did just follow the pattern of Yarick and Chaos Lords and things, getting slimmed down wargear or just going completely, I think it would be kind of sad. In terms of the characters, I feel like Pedro Cantor will be a sad iconic choice not to see come back. And if Games Workshop really does follow the Chaos Space Marine pattern of Chaos Lords versus Space Marine Captains and things, it could mean that they invalidate a crazy amount of people's models all in one fell swoop, so hopefully they don't go and do that. Otherwise, throughout the rest of the Imperium range, there are a few other models that might be under threat. Armies like Custodes, Sisters of Battle, and Adeptus Mechanicus perhaps aren't too badly off. All of those are quite recent ranges, so nothing really to call there. I guess the various flavours of Servitor might get hit. The only standard issue Servitors that Games Workshop sells at the moment are the ones that are packaged with the Tech Marine, and they feel like they're kind of aimed at standard Space Marines, so it's possible that the AdMech ones and maybe even the Guard ones might go away. Though admittedly in the recent Guard Codex the unit has remained, they've just given them some incredibly bad rules in game. For the Grey Knights, miniatures that aren't existing at the moment are the Grey Knight's brother Captain Stern. Perhaps not exactly the most central character, they gave him some fairly bad rules in the recent Codex, but I feel like maybe the Terminator Armoured Chaplain might be a hit to more collections perhaps. Games Workshop certainly has sold them in the past, but currently they're out of print. I guess if the rumours do turn out to be true about them redoing Terminators in some major way in 10th edition, that could be an interesting hole that they could try and fix. A Terminator Chaplain release would cover a hole in their line. Finally, for the forces of the Inquisition, the vast majority of the named ones are still intact, though now there is only one generic Inquisitor loadout on offer, and again that could be a fairly brutal war gear restriction. It would just be this one with the fancy hat, power sword, and fancy flamer gun. Demon hosts and inquisitorial acolytes are also not produced at the moment either, so that could limit down their retinue options. It would just leave them with the Joe Cairo. Again, I feel like an inquisitorial retinue type thing might be kind of useful as a kill team release at some stage. There have been some rumour engines that might have hinted at it. Maybe even it could potentially be the last one that's coming up set on the Space Hulk. Otherwise, as mentioned, most of the other ranges are broadly okay. The vast majority of them are plastic kits that are currently on sale, and the Imperial Guard have lots of fine cast relics and things, but arguably they just had their reckoning, and a whole load of things got removed, as with the previous examples. For the Forces of Chaos, the Chaos Space Marine Codex again had a big slim down. The models currently at risk in terms of range rotation are the Exalted Champion again, Huron Blackheart and Lucius the Eternal. Definitely possible that they could go given past precedents. Lucius in particular though is in dire need of a new sculpt, but I guess that wouldn't happen until they do a full Emperor's Children re-release. For the Death Guard and Thousand Suns, the majority of things aren't too terrible. I guess the Death Guard Lord of Contagion might lose its additional war gear option, seeing as they never re-released the plastic sculpt from Dark Imperium yet. I guess the thing that I'd be most concerned about for the Thousand Suns and Death Guard might be the generic options like the generic Lords and Cultists, things that I would have expected to be in the World Eaters Codex, but it seems that Games Workshop chose to cut them out. No idea if that trend had spread to the Death Guard and Thousand Suns with a rules rewrite. I guess we'll only wait and see. Finally, for the Chaos Demons, they've got a fairly enormous range. The only one that I could obviously see that was range rotated at the moment was the Spoilpox Scrivener, Mr. Nurgle Man with the big mouth, who tells the Plague Bearers to kill things harder. Quite a fun and slightly bonkers miniature, that one. Probably one of the less range central ones to them overall, though. Finally, for the Xenos, we've got the Eldar and the Drukhari. For the Craft Worlds, currently a bunch of the Phoenix Lords are out, and I think it would be quite disappointing if their rules went away for a time. They are kind of iconic to their various aspects. The ones that aren't in print at the moment are Azaman, Fugan, Karandras and Baharoth, and there's also a couple of other characters, including Illic Nightspear and Prince Iriel. I feel like Illic's a relatively recent addition to the range and doesn't have quite as much story, but Iriel and the Phoenix Lords have been fairly big parts of the canon for a long time now. Would be sad to see them go if Games Workshop chose to. Out of any of the factions, though, I feel like Drukhari perhaps have the most to lose from this, depending on how Games Workshop go. Their issue was that their major range release came before Games Workshop made their major pivot away from Finecast, and it means rather than just a few named HQs and things, a whole load of their main army line is actually in Finecast, and unlike units like Orc Tank Busters, Games Workshop did actually choose to rotate them out. Here we have the Grotesques, the Mandrakes, the Beast Packs, and the Court of the Archon with the various alien characters, including Mr. Snake in a suit here, plus Yuri and Rikarth, one of their few named characters. I guess it's perhaps also Games Workshop's reticence to update Drukhari as a fairly niche faction is perhaps one of the main reasons why so many of their kits weren't Finecast in the first place. Though to be fair to them, a lot of these kits weren't really fit for purpose in the first place. They were just ridiculously expensive for how many points of unit you got in game. Overall, Drukhari just really need a fairly major plastic release just to save these units from extinction if nothing else, though I think it would be pretty disappointing if Games Workshop chose to remove them in the interim, as they represent a big chunk of the Drukhari army, which isn't exactly the biggest range in comparison to other 40k things in the first place. Finally, we've got the other Xenos races. Recent releases like Genestealer Cults and Leagues of Votan are fine, but all the rest have some slightly more niche characters that are rotated out at the moment. For Necrons, their named characters all remained in production, but the biggest issues are the Locust Destroyer Lord and the regular Necron Lord. Both of those are at least reasonably popular picks in competitive armies at the moment, and have been miniatures that have been part of the range for a long time. I guess they are some of the last relics that have the green Gauss rods as part of their kit. Games Workshop redid almost everything that had that at the start of 9th edition, but not literally everything. I believe it was those two and the regular destroyers that were the only ones that got missed out. There is the possibility that Technomancer also seeing a war gear cut as well. The only one that they sell of that at the moment has the Canoptech cloak. There isn't the option for the one with the Canoptech control node anymore. For the Orcs, there's a trio of named characters, Boss Zagstruck, Snickrot, and Captain Badrock, all really quite cool characterful miniatures in their own way. We know for a fact that Snickrot's getting a new miniature sometime soon, as Games Workshop have teased him. but I feel like a few people will be kind of disappointed if Zagstruck went away. Again, he's a fairly popular pick in terms of competitive Goths armies in game at the moment. Quite nice to have an orky character hurtle out of the sky and hit you very hard with his vulture's claws. Finally, we've got the Tower Empire, and the two named Ethereals might be on the chopping block. Ornvar the Space Pope with his Honor Guard, and Ornshi the Dueling Ethereal. They are kind of fun models to have in the range. Maybe their miniatures are kind of showing their age as well, and perhaps aren't quite as exciting as big shooty battlesuits and stuff. Talking of Ethereals, there isn't really an option for one that's not on a hover drone at the moment, though I suppose that might be okay, as you could just assemble the kit without it. And otherwise, out of the Tidewall fortifications, for some reason they kept the shield line and the drone port, but got rid of the gun rig. The fortifications are kind of a bit fun and niche anyway, to be honest, not exactly super strong, though it does feel a bit weird that they've discontinued part of it, but not the whole thing. Overall, it does add up to be a fair amount of stuff. If judging by the Chaos Space Marine, Imperial Guard, and the World Eaters codexes, it looks like around about 51 datasheets in the game could be at least threatened, and have the good chance they might not exist going into the next edition of Warhammer 40k. I guess being a little bit more focused on some of the more popular units maybe does have its advantages, but still there's a whole load of iconic choices here. I feel like it would be sad to just lose them wholesale. Probably the biggest deal for the Drukhari overall, who would actually lose some really big units if Games Workshop goes with their current range rotation thing. Let me know your thoughts though. How likely are we to lose some of these units when Games Workshop does 10th edition? And if this list did happen to go, which choices would you be most see to sad relegated to lack of rule support? If you'd like to keep up with some Warhammer 40k news and updates, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.